What's up guys, and welcome to another video from CodeReviewIO. Today we will talk about, we will continue with a part 2 from Flutter Navigation 2.0. Please make sure to check out the first video about the Flutter navigation in one of the corners, and let's get started. Now we will check this recipe model, so we will use the same model as we used before, and then we will make a new file called app.dart. In this file, we will move everything inside the main to the app.dart, because we need to keep the main clean as possible. Now, after the app.dart, we will create the state. So before we had to do the state inside the widget. But now we will use the class. So we extend change notifier here, and we check if the selected index, and also we put also a selected recipe. Then we take the recipes from the model and we paste it here, and this is recipe, this is our state. So this is our let's say the model that we need to use. And then we just make some getters and setters for selected index and for selected recipe. So why these setters and getters needed? Because we need to change notifier to fire the change notifier every time we selected the recipe. So that's why we need also to reset the selected index, as we see here, or reset the selected recipe, and then we take the change notifier or notify listeners to notify to notify the route. So, and here we make another one, getter and setter also get selected recipe by ID, and we pass the ID to it, and we check if our list has the selected recipe, then we return to 0, and then otherwise we return the selected the recipe from our recipes. And in this case also we have the get selected recipe, and we check if the length is equal is greater than -1, so the length of the recipes, then we return this. So for now our state is done. Now we will create our router directory. Router directory, it will have a lot of files. One of them we will start about recipe route path. So this is an abstract class. You can actually make the interface, but I don't think it's gonna pass with the Dart, so it's better to use abstract class. Then we will make some route class path, let's say the recipe list path, which is our home screen, and that will extend our abstract class, which is a recipe route path. So the idea here is actually is that whenever we need to return a route class, a recipe route, any recipe route, then we will use a recipe route path. In this case also for recipe details path, as we can see. But in this case, details, we need the ID also to pass it to the constructor, and we need to make sure this ID will be required, because we need it to fire the details. In the setting also, we will have also recipe settings, and the recipe settings also will extend also the route, the recipe route path. Now we will start with recipe route information parser. So as we talked about in the latest video, we said that the route information parser is the parser where the route goes in, and then we will parse any route, and then we output the new route. And that's why we extend the route information parser with the recipe route path, because now we can check what is type of the route, and then we can return one of the recipe route path, which is the settings details of the list. So first here, and that's typically especially for web, because here we use the URI, and then we check the URI if has let's say a path segment, and path segment is actually the query. So it is something if has the query, or if has if the route has /add settings, something like this. So we will return recipe setting path because the route has settings. Also, we check if the length more than 2. In this case, we will see which type of recipe route path, because here we have 2 cases. Is it recipe or recipe list? So if the path segment has a recipe, then we know that is a recipe, and we return recipe details path. Otherwise, we will return recipe list path. With that's all done, now we will go to start with another function that also comes with router information parser, and that's called restore route information parser. And this will pass also the path configuration. So it will pass the path configuration here, and then we as a config, and then we check if the config type of recipe list or maybe recipe details, so any of them, so then we will return the class of this path. But then we will send the location to it, and that means that in the route information we send the location, and the location will goes to the parse route information, and then in there we will parse the route. So if you think about it, it's gonna be restore route information fired first, and then the parse route information. But in this case, we try to send the ID, we try to put the at home, or maybe at recipe or at settings, and that's what we talked about in the parse route information about this type of route. Now we will go to make a recipe route delegate, and that will extend definitely recipe router delegate, and also will with the type of recipe route path. And here we need the change notifier, the pop navigation route delegate mixing, and that's also the type recipe route path. And we need some overridden So one of the instances we need is the global key with the navigator state, and then we need also the type of the state. So we need the cake recipe state, and then we call it just app state, and that will be just the cake recipe state, our state, because we need to use this inside our class. And also we need to check the constructor, and then we define the navigator key as a global key, and then we define the type of navigator as navigator state, and then we pass inside it to notify the listeners via the change notifier here. So instead of say app state add listener, notify listeners, and this add listeners be available because in the app state we also we can add any listeners to the app state, and that's why we can add the function notify listeners on it. Another overridden method is the build method and the set new route path. So the build method we will do it later, but for set a new route path, and this will take the route path config, and we will do almost the same as we did in the route information path parser. And that's gonna be return recipe, and then instead if config is recipe list, it means that our home. So we don't need to return, actually we just set the state to selected index 0. Recipe list is no, because now in our home there is no recipe list. So else if the config is recipe details, in this case we need to select the select index will be 1. So actually the selected index will be null because we don't need it also, but we need to select recipe by ID by config ID that will comes from the recipe route path. Otherwise we have a settings, the selected index will be 1, and then the app state no needed, so it will stay no, because we don't need to pass anything to the settings. unless we need to pass something. So you can pass here, you can make some configuration to pass the setting to the setting screen any state. Now inside the build we will use the navigator as we did before, and then we will use the third required instances. One of the key, use the navigator key. On pop page we check the route, and then we check also the app state, and then in the end we return true. So here we just make a condition if the selected recipe not null, then we make sure that selected recipe is return null, and then we return true at the end. But first we need to notify listeners, and then in the page, so we need to return some in the pages, we need to return something, and as a material route, so our material page. In this case we will use a collection, so we will use a class that return all the screens. So for now we just say app, but the thing is the app needs to have the state in it, so we need to adjust the constructor of the app and then pass the app state to it. For now, just for the errors, but actually we will adjust this app later. Now we will make another file called inner router delegate, and that will use the same logic almost as recipe route delegate. So it will extend the route delegate, and then also with as a generic type recipe router path. And we also use the change notifier pop navigator route delegate mixing, and then we will use also the global key. This is almost the same, and then but we can define the navigator state in the beginning, so it's also the same. And then also we will use the state, so we need to retrieve the state from as an app state, and this for this case we need to just to make getter here. And then we use also the setters, so we pass the app state to the inner route, and then we need also to change notify listeners in this case. So whenever the new state comes, we need to notify listeners. So we will see this this class inner route shortly. Where we're gonna use it. So for this also we need to have some override functions, and that's the most important is the build. So in this case also we need to return a new route, and in this case that's why we need to navigator. So we will have some the navigator key. We will also use the pages, and in this case the pages will have some information here. So we check if the app state selected index 0, then return selected index not null, so we just return recipe details screen in this case. But we will adjust these pages later because it needs more adjustment after all. But we need to talk about the pop on pages, and that's in this case app state selected we make null, then we just notify listeners and we return route.pop, because this route.pop also will return true or false. And for set a new route, this is not needed, so we're not gonna implement this for this class. Now we go and to check the recipe details screen. I think I have yes, I have a typo. Yes, so recipe details screen is just we start with the screen, so we just return a recipe, but in this case we need to pass the recipe to this state. I mean, not state, to this widget. So in this case we will make an instance as a recipe here. We will make an instance also a value key. I don't know if this is needed, but for some cases maybe needed. And then we make the required recipe, and then we paste we print the recipe inside the body. Here we use the padding, and then inside the padding so actually this screen is the same as we did before, so it is gonna be most typically the same. We just need to print out the recipe inside our recipe detail screen. So we will use here a column, and we use the flat button. A flat button here, we need to the navigator to go back, so we use a flat button here. And then we check if the recipe is not null, then we just check the recipe title, or the recipe, there is no title, the recipe name, the recipe chef, the recipe category, and then we just adjust the styling depending on which depending on yours actually, because you need to adjust it as long you need to adjust it depends on what you like actually. So that's recipe details. Now we have recipe list screen, and the recipe list screen, it will be the same as we did before. As I said, it's gonna be just extend the stateless widget. We need to pass the recipes to the constructor, and then we need to build the widget. So in this case, the recipe list screen will be passed, and then we call those recipes here. We make sure that's all of them they are imported, and then we need also the value on change on top, because we will loop inside this class. We will iterate through the recipes, and we need to make sure that for every recipe click, we need to fire the recipe on top. So in this case, we will use upper, the body, and then we will use list view here, and then we'll pass the children to it, and we iterate through the recipes inside our widget. In this case also, we will print the list tile, and for everyone we will pass the title, we will pass the subtitle, and we will pass also the chef, so we can actually make the subtitle with the subtitle as a row, and then we pass the category and the chef with it. Here we pass also the recipe on top. So on top on the recipe, we will pass the recipe to the on top. So this that's why we already configured this in the top. So here we're configuring also the row, so we make sure this will look good. And then also we will go to the settings screen. So settings screen actually is just let's say in dummy screen, because we don't put any logic into it. So actually we just need to print something, because in this case we need to have third screen, and that's why we use the settings screen. And then we will go to the fade animation screen. So this fade animation screen is just a widget that will extend the page and then return a material page. So in this case, this is very important, because we need to have something, let's say some animation between the screens, and that's why we need to pass this class. So everything will go through fade animation. Any screen will go through fade animation. It will have their animation, and then it will return the screen. So it's just like a context with animation. And then we need to return a page route builder, and then it will be, the setting will be this. It means this fade animation, or this page. And then the page builder, we use the page builder, and we will pass the required parameters. And the first one is the context, that's why I use underscore, animation 1, animation 2, and then we will make our animation fade between, or curve between, and then we use it inside the fade transition. In this case also we need to pass the child to it, because the child will pass in the constructor. So we need to have the widget as a child, and then instructors as required our child. So now we will go back to the inner route delegate. That's when we didn't do any pages here. That's because we need the fade animation. So the fade animation here, we will use some let's say some conditions here. We check if the app state, if selected index or selected index equal to 0, it means I am in the home. So I need to return fade animation page for all the pages here, and then we pass the recipe list path, recipe list screen, sorry, and then we'll pass the recipes as state recipes. We'll pass on top, and this will be implemented later also. And then we continue with the condition. We will continue to the other condition here. We will when we will check what if the app state, the selected recipe is not equal to null. In this case, we need to return material page, not fade animation, because fade animation will be just for tabs, just for bottom tabs, and this one is just for material page. Thus we need to return recipe details screen with app state to recipe to selected recipe. Now we make also the else statement here. The else statement will will return the fade animation. Why fade animation? Because it's another tab, as I said. Here is another tab. So we have the list, we have the home screen, and we have the home screen. We have the also the recipe details, and the settings screen will be another tab. So that's why we need to pass the fade animation page here. And then the value key here, or the key, is important because we need to differentiate between the screens. So the value key or the key should be unique. And that's just for formatting. So as I said, on tab it will be implemented later. Now we will go to the app. So normally the app is just return anything, but we will make first we will convert this to stateful widget, and then we will make the app as app shell. So because this app for now doesn't do anything, but we need to return something. So that's why we needed to make this app shell, because I said is we need a widget that return all the type of widgets. So we will make first the state instance. One of them is inner route delegate, and also the child bag button dispatcher. So for inner route delegate, we will pass the widget as app state, because as we did before in the class, in the inner route delegate we need to pass the state to it. So this will be here where we do the initialization, and also we will pass the route app state to it. And then we will have also the change dependencies, and also the change dependencies will have the back button dispatcher as a route of context, and then we will create child back button dispatcher from this class. And also we will have the update widget. Here we will where we update the widget in the router delegate. We will say app state is the widget app state, because otherwise in the top the inner route delegate will not pass the app state to it. So we need to update it. It's like if you are from React, it's kind of like component update. And then we will use the app state here. We will make use of the scaffold. We return the router. We will pass the router delegate to it, and then the back button dispatcher. And also we need to have the body, the bottom navigator bar, and here we will use some items. So we will have two items here, one of the settings and the second one for the home screen. So we will make some usage from it. So icons as home, and then we will pass the label as home. And also if we copy this and then paste it, and then we'll make the settings tab. What's important here is that whenever we click on one of the tabs, what's going to be happen. And in this case, we need to make sure that the app state needs to change, because selected index needs to change from index to the new index that's selected, and that's the difference in this case. Because if the selected index is changed, then it will trigger the app state and it trigger the route delegate, the inner route delegate in this case, and then it will change the state. Here I will just make some refactoring just to make sure that this is called app shell, not just app, because after all it's just it's just app shell. And also we will pass the app shell to make sure this app shell is passed here, and then so it's just some refactoring here. So a bit, yes, this here is also up shell, and here we do return the app, but actually the app is going to be different than up shell. So the app here, it will return, I will return null for now, but we need some instances here. So we need recipe route path. So we need recipe route recipe route delegate, and also we need the recipe route information parser. And we try to build the app here by return the route, actually by return the material app.route, and then we router, and then we will pass the route information parser, and then we will pass the route recipe route delegate. In this case, we will back to the on tab, and we will make sure that once we selected recipe, we need to update the selected recipe and then change the notifier. Now, to demonstrate our work, we'll see that the animation and the tabs, also we'll see some designs a problem in the top. So this is up to you, because I want you to check this design to be the same as my design, and that will be and this. So in this case, I will use the same design. So there's some problems, and then it's as a challenge for you is to fix these problems. And the GitHub link will be down to verify your work. If you like the video, please subscribe and hit the like. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.